I used to think my graduation day would be the happiest day of my life, but right in the middle of the party, my nephew threw my cake on the floor and said, "Eat it off the ground, Aunt Amy. Mom says that's all you deserve." My mother laughed. My sister laughed. No one defended me. I just walked away quietly, without a word, while the sound of their laughter followed me out of my own celebration. That evening, my mother texted, "We're done. Don't ever come back." 1. My sister reacted with a heart. I replied, "Then tomorrow, I'm removing my name from every loan." By midnight, the family group chat exploded 100 missed calls. Have you ever been made to feel like a stranger by your own family? Tell me where you're listening from, because I truly want to know if this kind of injustice has reached someone else's heart. My name is Amelia Wilson. I just earned my master's degree in sustainable technology from the University of Washington. 6 years of nonstop work, 2 part-time jobs, endless nights in the lab, all for this moment. I came home to Boise, Idaho, for a graduation party. My mother said they'd been planning for a month, but the air felt heavy, like something fragile was about to collapse. The backyard glowed under the sun, fairy lights strung across the fence, the smell of barbecue drifting through the air. Someone played country music, kids ran around screaming, glasses clinked together. Everything looked perfect, at least on the surface. But then I noticed a small detail, the kind only someone used to being pushed aside would see. The cake that said, "Congrats, Amelia," wasn't placed at the center of the table like usual. It had been shoved to the corner, beside a stack of paper plates and a few sweating cans of soda. Amanda, my sister, sat at the center of attention, laughing brightly as she talked about her family's latest vacation in Florida. Everyone listened, smiling, engaging, as if she were the only person worth celebrating. I stood behind them, clutching my purse, trying to hide the ache of not belonging. I forced a polite smile, walked toward the cake table, and reached for a knife to cut a small piece for everyone. That's when Amanda's son Liam, 10 years old, with his mother's same sharp grin, ran up. At first, I thought he was just being playful. He stood close to the table, eyes glinting with mischief, and then in one quick motion he shoved the entire plate to the ground. The porcelain shattered, frosting splattered everywhere, and the cake rolled across the concrete, catching the last light of the setting sunday. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't process what had just happened. Then Liam's voice rang out clear, deliberate, rehearsed. "Eat it off the ground, Aunt Amy. That's what Mom says you deserve." The air went silent. In that suspended moment, I could hear everything: the wind whispering through the pine trees, the faint crackle of the grill, and the pounding of my own heart. I looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to say something. My mother. My father. Amanda. A scolding, a correction. Even a soft, "That's not nice, honey." But all I heard was Amanda's stifled laugh, her hand covering her mouth as she pretended to hide it, and my mother's airy voice saying, "Oh, come on, it's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive, Amy." My father sat in his folding chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on his phone screen, as if what had just happened in front of him was too trivial to deserve acknowledgement. That was the moment I realized they hadn't planned a celebration for me. They had planned a reminder. A reminder of where they believed I belonged. I looked down at the ruined cake melting on the ground. The words "Congrats, Amelia" were crushed beneath someone's shoe, only a crooked letter clung faintly to the pavement. In that moment, a flood of memories surged through me: the years I spent working double shifts at the coffee shop to help pay Amanda's tuition, the time I sold my old car so my parents could fix the leaky roof. Every sacrifice, every quiet effort to belong, all condensed into this single, humiliating image: a child throwing my cake on the floor while the adults laughed. Some kinds of humiliation don't need shouting. Sometimes all it takes is indifference, a look, a laugh, a silence, and your heart splits open piece by piece. I didn't say a word. No protest. No defense. No explanation. Just a deep breath, the sweetness of frosting mixed with the smoky air catching in my throat, and then I slowly untied the apron, folded it, and set it down on the table. Everyone kept laughing. No one noticed I was leaving. I grabbed my jacket, walked across the deck, each step sounding sharp against the wooden boards. As my hand touched the doorknob, my mother called after me. "Amy, don't make it a scene. It's just a kid." I didn't look back. The door opened, the late afternoon light poured over me, and I stepped outside into the Idaho wind that stung my face yet somehow felt freeing. Behind me, the laughter continued, blending with the fading notes of a country song. I drove away down the narrow neighborhood street, my mind empty as if someone had erased every good memory I'd ever tried to hold on to. Sometimes, the deepest pain isn't in the act itself, but in realizing no one in your family thinks it's wrong. I didn't cry. I just gripped the steering wheel tighter, watching the sky fade from gold to violet. And in that quiet, I knew it was time to leave them. Not just physically, but completely. As I drove toward Seattle, the streetlights stretched ahead like a faint ribbon of golden stars along Interstate 84. The wind pounded against the windows, the radio hummed a low jazz tune, but I barely heard it. All I could see in my mind was that cake hitting the floor again and again, like a slow-motion reel that wouldn't stop replaying. I kept wondering where I had gone wrong. I had come to that party full of gratitude, with a fragile hope that after all these years, they'd finally be proud of me. But a single sentence from a child, a single laugh from the adults that was enough to show me every effort had been meaningless. Through the windshield, the Idaho landscape faded behind me, and the past began to unspool as if that long stretch of road wasn't just carrying me away from their house, but from the entire life I had once tried so hard to belong to. I think I was about 8 or 9 when I first began to understand that in my family, some people were loved for who they were, and others were only loved for what they did. I belonged to the second group. My mother always said, "Amelia, you're the older sister. You have to share, you're the strong one." At first, I thought that was a compliment. I believed being strong meant being someone to be proud of. But over time, I realized that in our house, strong was just another word for, you don't get to have feelings. Whenever I was tired, or sad, or just needed a hug, they would say, "You don't need that, Amanda's the sensitive one." I still remember my 13th birthday vividly. Mom said we'd have something simple, because we're saving money for Amanda's dance classes. Oh! That day, I had exactly one cupcake, literally one with a crooked candle stuck in the center and the words, "Happy B-Day, A," written in rushed white frosting. I blew out the candle, smiled, and listened as Mom said, "You're okay with this, right? You're not really the kind of person who needs parties." I nodded, because I knew if I didn't, they'd call me ungrateful. 3 months later, when Amanda turned 10, she had a full-blown birthday bash, a 3-tier cake, heart-shaped balloons, presents stacked across the living room. I spent most of that day helping Mom wash dishes while Amanda laughed and unwrapped her gifts. It was then I realized my place in this family was never under the spotlight. I was the one behind the curtain, cleaning the stage so everyone else could shine. My father didn't scold much, but when he did speak, his words carried the weight of comparison. "Amanda's artistic. You're just good at practical things." He said that when I won first place in the state science fair. He said it like my award, something I'd worked months for, was just a lifeless piece of metal, while Amanda's messy watercolor painting on the wall was the real source of pride. I tried not to let it hurt. I told myself that someday, they would see my worth, the worth of someone who could stand on her own without needing to be held. In high school, when Amanda started hanging out with friends, I became the designated fixer. Mom would ask me to drive her to school, to finish her homework when she didn't feel like it, to clean up after her parties. I remember one night while I was studying for the SATs, Amanda knocked on my door. "Hey, I spilled paint on my dress. Can you wash it for me before Mom sees? She'll be mad." I dropped everything, my notes, my focus, my one shot at a scholarship, and spent the evening scrubbing that stupid dress. When my SAT results came back just 20 points short of a full-ride scholarship, Mom only sighed and said, "If only you'd been more focused." I didn't tell her I had skipped studying to help her precious daughter. In that house, every explanation I gave was treated like an excuse. I was 16 when I overheard my mother talking to a neighbor. She said, "Amanda's the girl of the heart, and Amelia's the girl of the mind. They balance each other out. Thank God the older one doesn't need much attention." I stood halfway down the stairs, listening to every word. I didn't cry, I just felt hollow. That was the first time I truly understood what it meant to be loved conditionally. When I got a full scholarship to college in Seattle, I left home on a crisp autumn morning. Mom hugged me, but the embrace was short and distant, more duty than affection. Dad simply said, "Don't cause trouble." Amanda waved from the doorway with a polite, plastic smile, as if she were sending off someone she'd never see again. That day, I made myself a silent promise. If I wanted to be seen, I would have to become so exceptional that they couldn't pretend not to notice me. I worked nonstop extra shifts at the lab, instant noodles for 3 meals, saving every cent. And still, I sent money home not because they asked, but because I thought that was how you proved you were still a good daughter. But no matter how much I sent, the messages never changed. "Amanda's struggling, can you help a bit? Your niece is too young, can you pitch in for her tutoring?" And every time, I said yes. Because in my head, my mother's old words still echoed. "You're the strong one." I thought if I gave enough, they would finally stop asking, that maybe they'd feel proud of me. But in my family, sacrifice was never seen as love, only as obligation. A car horn blared behind me, snapping me back to the present. I was already out of Idaho. Night had fallen. The road sign ahead read, "Seattle 120 miles. For the first time, a strange calm came over me. 27 years, that's how long I had been chasing acceptance, like someone running after a train that never stopped. Every time I thought I was close, they moved the station farther away. I let out a dry laugh and whispered to myself. I used to think if I worked hard enough, they'd finally see me. But in my family, fairness was a gift they never bothered to wrap for me. The car sped past endless rows of dark pine trees, and I watched my childhood fade behind me, that cramped kitchen, Mom's soft voice calling Amanda's name, and me standing in the corner, quietly washing dishes. Maybe I had learned to stay silent to survive. But tonight, as I looked in the rearview mirror, I realized. It was time to be silent, not to endure, but to let go. I no longer wanted them to see me. I wanted to see myself. By the time I reached Seattle, it was late. Rain drizzled over the empty streets, streetlights stretching into long reflections across the wet asphalt. I unlocked the door to my tiny apartment in Capitol Hill, just enough space for one person, with a desk by the window and a few potted plants I'd nurtured since spring. The silence was so complete I could hear my own footsteps against the wooden floor. I set my bag down, switched on the desk lamp. Its warm yellow light painted the wall comforting, yet painfully lonely. I was about to make some tea when my phone buzzed. A message from Mom lit up the screen. "We've chosen to sever all contact. You've caused enough tension. Stay away forever." Below it was a red heart. Amanda's reaction, a like, as if she were approving my exile. I stared at the screen, frozen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I could picture them sitting together in the living room, drafting that message, convinced they were right. "Stay away forever." Those words glared back at me, cold, sharp, and final, like metal pressed against skin. I set my phone down on the table and leaned back in my chair. In the small apartment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock. For the first time in my life, they had said it plainly, they didn't need me anymore. And strangely, beneath the shock, I felt light. Frighteningly light. It was like finally setting down a suitcase you'd been told all your life you had to carry. I looked around the apartment, the stacks of books, the laptop, the sticky notes covering the wall. Everything here was built by me, piece by piece, without anyone's help. And I found myself asking, why had I ever believed I needed their approval in the first place? I opened my laptop. The screen lit up, reflecting the exhaustion on my face. No more tears left. I clicked into my bank account, then navigated to loan accounts. 2 lines appeared, one for my parents' house in Boise, and another for Amanda's shiny new SUV, both co-signed under my name. Because, as they'd once said, you have the better credit, honey, just help the family out. I remembered the day I signed those papers. Mom's reassuring voice. You're just signing, we'll make all the payments. We're family, it's what we do. And I had believed her. I always did. My cursor hovered over the numbers, the automatic monthly deductions that had quietly drained my paycheck for years. Hundreds of dollars disappearing from my account every month, no reminders, no acknowledgement, no gratitude. I leaned back and let out a quiet laugh. In my head, I could still hear Amanda's voice, Mom's voice, their laughter from the party blurring together with the image of the smashed cake on the ground. It was all the same language, really, contempt. I opened my messages, my fingers moving slowly over the keyboard. I typed one simple line, no more, no less. Removing my name from every loan tomorrow. New emoji. New explanation. I hit send, then placed the phone face down on the table. The room was still bright, but it no longer felt cold. I stood up, poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, inhaled the gentle scent, and felt my body finally begin to loosen. I didn't think about them anymore. I thought only about the one thing I could still control: my boundaries. That night, I opened my old expense notebook, the same one I'd used during grad school to track every dollar I saved. I flipped to the first page and, in black ink, wrote, "Start again." Beneath it, I added, "Freedom doesn't come from being loved by others. It comes from stopping them from draining you." Outside, the rain kept falling. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft glow of the laptop screen. It illuminated a small photo frame on my desk, the only childhood photo I still kept. In it, I was about 8 years old, wearing a floral dress, smiling brightly as I held the neighbor's dog. I remembered how Mom had scolded me that day for hugging something dirty, but in the picture, I was still grinning pure, untouched joy. I gently turned the frame over, face down on the desk. Not out of anger, but because I wanted to stop there. At 11:47 p.m., my phone started ringing. First it was Mom, then Amanda, then Dad. The screen kept flashing, but I didn't answer. One message after another appeared. "What are you doing? Why did you remove your name? You don't understand the consequences. Amelia, please, just listen to Mom." I read every word, then closed my laptop. In the chorus of missed calls and panicked voicemails, I didn't hear a single apology. Not one. All I could hear was fear, the kind that surfaces when people realize their backup wallet has finally cut them off. I powered off my phone, climbed into bed, and pulled the blanket up to my chest. The rain drummed softly against the window. And in that quiet Seattle night, I realized I'd finally done the one thing I'd been terrified of my entire life. I had chosen to live without needing their forgiveness or approval. Maybe that's what freedom really looks like. Not fireworks or grand gestures, but a single message, a single decision, and the absolute silence that follows. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Seattle was wrapped in its familiar pale gray mist, clinging to the window like memories that hadn't yet dried. I brewed a cup of black coffee, took a slow sip, and looked outside. The city was waking up. Buses crawling down wet streets, people in hooded jackets crossing intersections, cafes flickering to life with soft yellow light. Peace. A kind of peace I'd never known back in Boise. But deep down, I knew today would be the day I cut the last remaining thread tying me to that old life. No more helping the family. No more, you're the big sister, you have to carry the load. No more love bound by debt and guilt. I walked into the Green First Bank branch, a 2-story glass building in downtown Seattle. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment?" I nodded. "Yes, with Mr. Diaz." She led me into a small consultation office. Mr. Diaz, a man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, stood up and shook my hand. "Miss Wilson," he said warmly. "Please, have a seat. I reviewed the documents you emailed last night. Looks like we have a few important things to discuss about your cosign loans. I sat down, placing the folder neatly on the table. I've been taken advantage of, Mr. Diaz, I began, my voice calm but steady. I co-signed 2 loans, one for my parents' house in Boise and one for my sister's SUV. I've been quietly paying them for years because I thought that was my duty as family. But after what happened, I want to end every tie. He nodded, jotting notes in neat, deliberate strokes. I understand. We can help initiate a co-borrower liability release if you can prove you no longer reside at the property, hold no ownership interest, and that the primary borrowers remain financially active. I handed him the documents, proof of my Seattle address, my lease agreement, pay stubs, bank statements, and an email from my mother dated last year that read, "The house is ours, you just helped sign." Mr. Diaz read in silence, then looked up at me with quiet empathy. "They took advantage of your trust, Miss Wilson. Now it's time you reclaim control." He picked up the phone, called the bank's internal legal department, and said firmly, "Let's begin the release process for Miss Wilson. Co-borrower liability effective immediately." When I signed the first document, I felt my heart pounding, not from fear, but from relief. Each signature felt like a small blade, slicing through one of the invisible ropes that had bound me for years. Afterward, Mr. Diaz helped me freeze all joint accounts so they could no longer borrow or move money using my credit. In 48 hours, he explained, all linked access to your credit profile will be locked. If they try to open a new loan, the system will automatically reject it. I smiled faintly, thanked him, and stood. He walked me to the door and said softly, "You did the right thing, Miss Wilson. Sometimes protecting yourself is the only way to teach others to respect you." Oh, 1. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, but my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I stopped at a small cafe on the corner and ordered a cappuccino. When the barista handed me the cup, she smiled and said, "Have a good day." I answered with a phrase I had never quite believed in before. "I will." Meanwhile, somewhere far away back in Boise, Idaho, I could almost picture the chaos. Mom frantically calling the bank, Amanda trying and failing to log into the joint account. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. All my life, they had controlled me with guilt. Now, I controlled them with silence. That afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 7 missed calls from Mom. 3 from Dad, 4 from Amanda. Not a single message asking, "Are you okay?" Only, "Why are you doing this? Do you know what you've caused?" I didn't respond. Instead, I walked along Lake Union, watching the sunlight ripple across the water. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was breathing with my own lungs, no one else's weight in the air I took in. That evening, while I was cooking a simple dinner pasta with greens, my phone vibrated again. Not a call this time, but a notification from the family group chat. The name at the top, Wilson Family. The first message was from Mom. "How dare you ruin our credit? Do you realize what you've done?" Amanda replied almost instantly, "This is so petty, Amy. You've always been jealous." Then Dad chimed in with a single line, "You went too far." I stood there, the glow of the screen reflecting off the small kitchen counter. For a few seconds, I hesitated. Then I typed one line back, calm, deliberate, and final. I just stopped paying for people who laughed when my cake hit the floor. I hit send. The room fell silent. The word "seen" appeared beneath my message. Then nothing. No reply. No excuses. No laughter. Just silence. A heavy, beautiful silence. I set my phone down on the table and continued my dinner. The smell of tomato sauce filled the apartment. Outside, the sky had turned violet, the last streaks of sunlight glimmering across the lake. I ate slowly, each bite felt like closure. The closure of duty. Of fear. Of that twisted version of love I had spent years trying to preserve. I wasn't their caretaker anymore. I wasn't their safety net, their silent backbone, their invisible daughter. I was simply Amelia, a 27-year-old woman who paid her own rent, bought her own meals, and finally chose her own peace. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I don't need them to love me. I just need them not to owe me." And for the first time, I slept deeply. No dreams of Boise, no voices whispering, "Be strong," only the steady rhythm of rain against the roof, like a lullaby for a life newly freed. 3 days after I sent that final message, the air in my apartment was strangely calm. I worked from home, made coffee, played soft music, and almost forgot that just days ago, I had severed a bond that had strangled me for 27 years. Everything seemed peaceful until that Wednesday morning when a violent knock echoed through the door. It was sharp, angry, relentless. I froze, then glanced at the video intercom. My heart sank. Outside, standing in the hallway, were my mother and Amanda. Two faces I knew by heart now appearing through the cold, distorted lens like strangers. Mom stood in front, arms crossed. Amanda had pulled her mask down to her chin, her face flushed red. Before I could even move, Mom's voice cut through the door high, furious, trembling with control. "Amelia, open this door right now. We need to talk. What did you do with the bank?" I stood still, because I knew if I opened that door, I would be swallowed whole again by the same storm that had consumed me my entire life. Where every explanation I gave turned into guilt, and every tear of theirs became a weapon. I took a deep breath. I didn't answer. The pounding grew louder. Amanda's voice cracked through. "You ruined everything, do you know that? The bank's threatening foreclosure, Mom's credit is ruined all because of you. Open the door." I stared at the screen. Her hair was messy, her eyes wild, a mix of fury and fear. For the first time, I saw something new in her, not power, not perfection, but panic. The panic of someone losing control of what they always assumed was theirs. Still, I said nothing. I turned on the voice recorder on my phone and placed it on the table near the door. Mom's voice came again, shrill and shaking. "We're family, Amelia. You don't treat family like enemies." All over. I looked at their faces on the screen, both burning with indignation, and answered quietly, just loud enough for the microphone to capture. "If they act like intruders, then the line between family and boundary no longer exists." I opened the 911 app and pressed call. A calm voice answered, "Seattle Police Department, how can I help you?" I kept my voice steady. "There are two people standing outside my apartment door, yelling and refusing to leave. I'd like to report trespassing." "Alzer haven't. Do you know them?" the operator asked. "Yes," I said, eyes still fixed on the screen. Amanda stomping her feet, Mom waving her hands. "They're my family. But today, they're just people violating my boundary." Less than 10 minutes later, two police officers arrived. I watched through the door camera as they approached. The moment they appeared, my mother and Amanda rushed toward them, both talking over each other, hands gesturing wildly. Mom started shouting, "She's my daughter. She destroyed our family's finances. We just want to talk to her." Amanda's voice broke into sobs. "She almost cost me my car. My fiancé's leaving me because of my credit score. She's heartless." One of the officers, a calm, middle-aged man, raised his hand slightly. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "this is private property. If she's asked you to leave, you need to leave." My mother's eyes flashed with anger. "She's my daughter. I have rights." The officer shook his head gently. "No, ma'am. You have rights as a mother, but not the right to trespass on an adult's property." I didn't open the door. I just watched. Mom started yelling louder, her words sharp, frantic. Amanda hid her face in her hands, crying. A small part of me wanted to run out, to hold them, to say I never wanted things to reach this point. But the larger part, the part that had been wounded over and over for years, kept me still. Because I knew if I opened that door, the cycle would start again. And this time, I couldn't survive another round. The officers repeated their request for them to leave. Amanda protested, insisting she just wanted a conversation. One of the officers pointed toward the stairs. "This conversation is over," he said firmly. "Let's go." My mother turned back toward the camera, eyes blazing. "Amelia, you'll regret this. Blood can't be denied." I didn't answer. The door stayed closed. Through the screen, I watched them being guided down the stairwell, their steps heavy, filled with anger and helplessness. When the police car finally rolled away from the street, I sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall. I didn't cry. I just exhaled a deep, steady breath that seemed to empty years of noise from inside me. There was no fury left, no guilt. Just stillness. The quiet after a long, unrelenting storm. I picked up my phone and checked the recording. Their voices came through clearly, every accusation, every sob, every tone of superiority. I saved the file and named it Boundaries, the 17th of April 2025. I knew I might never need it. But just knowing it existed made me feel safe. That afternoon, I stood by the window, watching Seattle bathed in the soft light of late day. Cars streamed along the street below. People passed by with coffee cups, dogs, briefcases, each carrying their own private world. And I wondered how many of them had faced the same choice. Between blood and dignity. Between being loved conditionally and being at peace alone. I took a long breath. Outside, the city went on. And no one knew that, in one quiet apartment above the street, a family had just fallen apart without a single scream. I poured more hot water into my cup and set the tea on the table. The phone lit up again, dozens of new messages from Amanda, from Mom, even from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Every one of them carried the same tone: blame. "You've embarrassed your mother. You're making the whole family suffer. Who taught you to be so cruel?" I didn't reply. I just read each one carefully. And deleted it. With every press of delete, I felt a little lighter, as if I were unloading one stone at a time from a backpack I'd carried for far too long. When night fell, I opened the window. The Seattle wind swept in crisp and cool, carrying the faint smell of roasted coffee from the cafe downstairs. I stood there, watching the city lights ripple across the water, and thought about everything that had just happened. They had driven hundreds of miles just to try to reclaim control over me and failed. I didn't hate them. I just pitied the version of myself who once believed that being obedient and hardworking would earn her love. My voice broke the stillness, soft but clear in the empty apartment. Sometimes the only way to be respected is to stop begging for it. I didn't say it for them. I said it for me. Then I closed the window, turned off the lights, and in that darkness, I felt something rare, a peace not born from someone else's silence, but from finally no longer pleading to be heard. 3 months later, summer arrived in Seattle as softly as a sigh. The sky was bright blue, thin clouds drifting like ribbons over Lake Union, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, not just existing to please someone. I'd moved into a small apartment on a quiet street near Fremont, its balcony facing the water. Every morning, when sunlight streamed through the blinds, I'd open the windows, brew my coffee, and listen to the gentle rhythm of waves lapping at the dock below. That sound calmed me more than any therapy session ever had. Work at Green Pulse Tech, the clean energy startup I'd been with for almost 2 years, was going better than ever. After completing a project modeling emission reduction systems for an industrial complex in Portland, I was promoted to head of sustainable analysis, a position I once thought was far beyond my reach. That morning, during a team meeting, our CEO, a poised woman named Lydia, looked at me and said, "Amelia, you're the kind of leader people trust. Not because you're loud, but because you're steady." I smiled. Something quiet bloomed inside me, like a seed finally reaching sunlight after a long, cold winter. I began building a circle of friends not bound by blood, but by empathy. Elena, an old grad school classmate now working at a nonprofit for solar energy, often stopped by on weekends. She brought toasted bread. I made roasted cauliflower soup. We talked about small, lovely things, books we'd read, movies we'd watched, or how my plants kept leaning toward the wrong direction of sunlight. Marcus, one of my colleagues, became like the brother I never had. He taught me how to keep boundaries at work, something I'd never known how to do in my own family. One afternoon, when I received an email from Mom with the subject line, "We just need to talk," Marcus glanced at me and said quietly, "You don't owe anyone your peace." Oh, I didn't reply to that email. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. My landlord, Mrs. Patel, a 60-something Indian widow who lived downstairs, brewed masala chai every afternoon and often brought me a cup. The first time I told her about my family, she just smiled a soft, knowing smile and said, "Family isn't where we're born. It's where we are seen with gentle eyes." I had never heard anyone say that before, but when she did, something inside me softened. Maybe I had found another kind of family, not one bound by blood, but by understanding. I began practicing yoga in the mornings. At first, it was just to help me sleep better. But eventually, it became part of my ritual for starting the day. I learned to breathe deeply, to release the tension in my shoulders, and to accept that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it's strength. On quiet evenings, I started cooking again. No more lonely cups of instant noodles. I made the food I loved: pasta drizzled with olive oil, creamy pumpkin soup, or simple pancakes with honey. When I sat down to eat, I often smiled to myself and thought, so this is what it tastes like taking care of yourself. One Saturday morning, I decided to reorganize the apartment. When I reached a dusty box of old graduation items, I pulled out a photograph from that day. Not the one from the party, but the picture a friend had taken in front of the university building. I was wearing the blue gown, diploma in hand, hair tossed by the wind. My eyes were bright not because I was confident, but because I still believed my family would be proud of me. I gently placed the photo in a frame and set it on the windowsill beside a small cactus I'd bought from Pike Place Market. The cactus, with its sharp spines and quiet blossoms, reminded me of myself. Under the frame, I slipped a small card that read, "Bloom where you're no longer watered." That afternoon, Elena and Marcus stopped by. We ordered pizza, shared stories, and looked through old photos. When Marcus saw the graduation picture, he teased, "You look like you were about to conquer the world." I laughed and said, "Maybe I was just trying to survive it." The three of us burst out laughing, then fell into a comfortable silence. After a moment, Elena said softly, "You know, you don't talk about Boise anymore." Of 60. I looked out toward Lake Union, where the sunset shimmered across the water, and replied, "Because I finally stopped living there in my head." Time passed, and the old wounds slowly began to close. Not because I forgot, but because I stopped touching them every day. Sometimes, a strange number would flash on my phone, or I'd get a short message from Mom. "We're struggling with the house. Call me, please." I would read them and then fold them away. I knew that if I went back, I would lose the very thing I had fought to find. The quiet peace inside myself. Now, I choose serenity over obligation. One late night, while tidying up my desk, I found a small note I'd written the day I met with Mr. Diaz at the bank. "Freedom isn't revenge, it's clarity." I smoothed the edges and pinned it back onto the wall. Right beside it was a photo of me, Elena, and Marcus on our trip to Oregon, the three of us standing on a mountain peak, hair whipped by the wind, laughing freely. Looking at it, I realized something quietly profound. I did have a family now, only this time, it was one I didn't have to ask permission to belong to. Before bed, I sat by the window, watching the city glitter below. In the distance, little boats floated across the dark water, their lights flickering like fireflies. I took a sip of tea and smiled. No anger. No sadness. Just gratitude. It had taken me nearly 30 years to understand that not everyone who shares your blood is your family. Sometimes, family is the people who never make you apologize for existing. And as the night wind brushed past my face, I whispered to myself, "Welcome home, Amelia." By my 4th month in Seattle, life had settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with yoga, Afternoons were spent working, evenings meant books or coffee with friends by the lake. Everything felt peaceful finally, truly peaceful. Until one Monday morning. I opened my laptop and froze. My inbox was overflowing. Nearly every subject line said the same thing. Are you okay? At first, I didn't understand. Not until Elena sent me a screenshot. It was a Facebook post from a profile named Linda Wilson. My mother. The post read, in large, bold text. Sometimes the child you trust the most ends up betraying you. Amelia stole from her parents and destroyed our credit. Some people never learn gratitude. Below it were dozens of comments from relatives, old neighbors in Boise, even people I barely remembered. Some offered sympathy to my parents. Others added their own poison to the story. And then there was one comment that stopped me cold. I heard she used her parents' money to buy that fancy apartment in Seattle, pretending it was funded by her startup. Guess we know the truth now. I stared at the glowing screen. My heartbeat was steady, not racing, not breaking. Once, even a harsh word from my mother could make me cry. But now, I didn't feel pain. Just emptiness. A kind of quiet that comes only when you finally realize they can no longer hurt you in the same way ever again. But social media, it's where rumors grow faster than mold in the dark. Within hours, the post had spread through every corner of my old life. Former classmates, neighbors from Boise, even a few of my colleagues at Green Pulse Tech had seen it. My inbox began to fill with cautious, polite messages. Hey, Amelia, is everything okay with your family? I knew that if I stayed silent, the story would feed on itself until it devoured my reputation. Instead of explaining myself to everyone, I wrote a single short email, clear, professional, and final to HR, my team, and my 3 closest friends at work. Subject: clarification, personal matter. Hi team. If you see my name in rumors or social media posts, please ignore them. Some people fight boundaries with lies. I'm okay and appreciate your professionalism and respect for privacy. Best. Amelia. I clicked send, then closed my laptop. Not to defend myself, but to protect my dignity. Because I knew. The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs time. A few days later, I got a phone call from Mrs. Richards, our old neighbor back in Boise. Her voice trembled through the speaker. Amy, I saw what your mother posted, but I know it can't be true. You were the hardest working kid in the neighborhood. I just wanted to say I believe you. I thanked her, keeping my voice steady. But after hanging up, my hands shook. I wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. I was afraid of that quiet kind of pity people give to those they see as broken. That tone of, poor thing. That night, Marcus and I sat at the Cloud Cafe, watching the city glow after a light rain. He stirred his coffee and asked, "Are you going to respond to it?" I smiled faintly. No. Every word they post exposes who they are, not who I am. He nodded slowly. You know, he said, people lose their power over you the moment you stop reacting. They throw fire, but if you don't burn, they choke on their own smoke. I've never forgotten that line. The following days, I went to work as usual. I still smiled at the receptionist, joined meetings, wrote reports. A few people looked at me with quiet curiosity, but no one asked. Maybe because they'd read my email. Or maybe because they were mature enough to understand that everyone has a shadowed part of their story. Either way, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Then one afternoon, during a meeting with Lydia, the CEO, her assistant knocked on the door. Someone just dropped off a document for Miss Wilson. I took the envelope, opened it, and froze for a moment. Inside was an official letter from Green First Bank, signed by Mr. Diaz himself. We confirm that Miss Amelia Wilson has been fully released from all liabilities concerning the joint mortgage and vehicle loan under the names of Linda and Amanda Wilson. These responsibilities are now solely under the original borrowers. I stared at the letter, the clean paper, the embossed seal, and felt something inside me unclench. It wasn't triumph. It was closure. I looked at the bold print on the letter, and it felt like an old wound had finally been stitched closed. I scanned the document and sent a copy to HR to add to my personal file, not because I needed to clear my name, but because I wanted a clear, definitive ending. That same evening, my mother's Facebook post disappeared. I didn't know why. Maybe someone convinced her to take it down, or perhaps the bank had contacted her to verify the truth. Either way, I didn't care. What did surprise me, though, was the message that arrived from Mrs. Richards. I saw the post was deleted. Some people have started apologizing. I just want you to know, Amy, the truth never stays hidden for long. I read it, exhaled slowly, and replied, "Thank you. All I want is peace." Over the next few days, my phone grew silent. No more midnight calls. No more angry texts. No more fabricated stories. I knew it wasn't because they'd realized their mistakes. It was because they had lost the only thing that made them care about me benefit. When they could no longer use me to borrow money, to pay debts, to play the role of their good daughter, they no longer had a reason to exist in my life. One late August afternoon, as the sun dipped over the lake, I sat on my balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, listening to Norah Jones hum softly through the speakers. I thought about everything: the cake shattered on the floor, the hateful messages, my mother's shouting at my door, the post that called me a thief. All of it felt like waves that had once crashed violently against me, but had now receded, leaving only calm water behind. I smiled faintly and whispered to myself, "Silence isn't weakness, it's the storm they never realized they lost." That night, I cleaned my desk. The graduation photo still sat beside the little cactus. I picked up a pen and added one more line to the old note on my wall. When people stop benefiting from your kindness, that's when you learn who ever loved you at all. Then I pinned it back up between project outlines and energy system diagrams, a quiet reminder to myself that family isn't the place where you must apologize for living truthfully. And sometimes, your silence is the loudest form of resistance. When I turned off the lights, the apartment glowed softly in the amber hue of the city. Outside, Seattle shimmered alive, awake, free. And me, the woman once branded the thieving daughter. I finally lived as who I truly was. Not proving, not defending, just being. In absolute peace. A year had passed since the day I severed every tie. Time has a strange way of healing. Not by making you forget, but by teaching you that pain no longer has the right to control your life. I had learned to live slowly, to stop reacting to everything, to simply exist in quiet mornings where sunlight filtered through white curtains and sparrows fluttered outside my window. My life had found its balance, work was steady, my health good, and the people around me, Elena, Marcus, Mrs. Patel, had become the kind of family that doesn't ask you to prove you belong. I no longer thought much about Boise. Until one early autumn morning, when the leaves outside had just started turning soft orange, and an email appeared in my inbox. Short, only one line, but it made my heart pause for a beat. From David Wilson. Subject: Your mother. Your mother fell. She's resting at home. She asked if you'd be willing to talk. If you don't want to, I understand. I stared at the words for a long time. No anger. No tenderness. Just strangeness. It had been almost 2 years since I'd heard his name without feeling a sharp ache. I read the email 3 times. Though brief, there was something honest in it. No manipulation, no guilt, no excuses, just a message. Normally, I would have ignored it. But for some reason that morning, I clicked reply. I can meet you, wherever and whenever you prefer. 3 hours later, his response arrived. The roastery, near the university. 2 p.m. tomorrow. I closed the laptop. A strange feeling settled over me, not fear, but something between curiosity and caution. Meeting someone who once broke you isn't easy, especially when you've built your peace so carefully. But maybe it was time to face the part of my past I'd avoided the most. The man who chose silence through all my years of pain. The next day, Seattle was draped in light rain. I wore a gray sweater, a thin scarf, and headed to the cafe. The roastery sat on a quiet corner, the kind of place students used for studying and soft beginnings. The air smelled of roasted beans and rain-soaked wool. An old jazz tune hummed through the speakers. I arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat by the window, my hands wrapped around a steaming cappuccino. When the door opened, I saw him. His steps were slower, his hair grayer, his face lined with years I had never noticed when I was a child. He looked around and then our eyes met. A flicker of hesitation. Then, a faint smile. "Hi, sweetheart," he said, voice rough, quiet. "Hi, Dad," I answered calmer than I expected to be. He sat down across from me, removed his glasses, set them on the table. For a few seconds, we said nothing. The rain outside fell in steady rhythm, mingling with the soft hiss of the espresso machine. I studied his face and realized something had changed. Not his features. His eyes. They no longer carried the certainty of someone who took sides. They were the eyes of a man who finally understood what he had lost. He cleared his throat and spoke softly. "I don't really know where to start. Your mother. She fell in the garden. She's home now, can't work for a while, she's not doing well. But when she woke up, the first thing she asked was whether you were okay. I thought you should know that." I nodded gently. "I'm fine, thank you for asking, Dad." He gave a slow nod, his gaze flickering before settling on the coffee cup between us. "I went back and read some of your old messages," he said. "That line, removing my name from every loan tomorrow. I've thought about it a lot. I realized I was wrong to let them treat you the way they did. I know your mother and Amanda went too far, and I said nothing. That silence, that was my greatest mistake. I stayed quiet. If he had said those words a few years ago, I probably would have cried. But now, they simply fell into a sealed part of me that no longer bled." I looked at him and said quietly, "I don't need an apology, Dad. I just need respect as an adult, as a person. I spent most of my life trying to prove I wasn't ungrateful. Now I just want to live without having to prove anything at all." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, his voice low. "I understand. And I'm glad you found your own life. I just want you to know I've been following your work. When I saw that article about your Green Pulse tech project, I was proud. Even if I don't have the right to say that." The words caught me off guard. A part of me wanted to believe him, another part held back, cautious. I didn't say either. I just smiled, small, calm. "Thank you, Dad." "Who?" He stayed a few more minutes, talking about Boise, the old neighbors, the apple tree in our yard that I used to climb every summer. Then he stood, slipping on his coat. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "I'm not sure your mother has the courage to reach out, but if you ever want to, she'd be happy to hear your voice." I nodded. "I'll think about it. But I can't promise." He smiled faintly, eyes a little red. "That's enough." When he left, I stayed seated. The cafe door swung open, letting in a breeze that smelled of rain and roasted coffee. I watched his figure disappear into the crowd and realized I no longer felt angry. No love. No hatred. Just a quiet kind of sadness. The kind you feel when you see an old book that once made you cry but no longer has that power. I pulled out my notebook and wrote a single line. Sometimes healing isn't about hugging and crying. It's about finally seeing each other after years of blindness. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. Thin rays of sunlight slipped through the clouds, scattering across the wet pavement. I lifted my face, took a deep breath, and felt an indescribable lightness. Maybe not everyone gets the chance to hear a late apology. But I did. And somehow, that was enough. That night, when I got home, I opened the window. The scent of wet wood drifted in from the rain. On the shelf, my little cactus had bloomed a single white flower. I touched it gently and smiled. It struck me then. Some things can still blossom, even after being forgotten for far too long. Later that evening, Seattle was bathed in a pale, golden light. The sunset lingered as if time itself didn't want to leave. I stood on my balcony, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, watching Lake Union shimmer with the last reflections of the day. In the distance, a ferry horn echoed, and the soft sound of waves brushed against the shore, a quiet farewell from the Sunday. It had been nearly a year since that afternoon with my father, and life had remained steady. I hadn't spoken to my mother again, nor reached out to Amanda. But within me, there was no anger left, only stillness, full and calm, like the lake before me. I set my tea on the small wooden table and opened my laptop. On the screen were notes for our team's new project, a citywide emissions monitoring system. Rows of numbers, graphs, and plans filled the page, each line carrying a truth I understood deeply now. Real change doesn't come from complaint, it comes from building something new with your own hands. Maybe that's exactly what I'd done with my life. As I adjusted a line of data, my phone buzzed softly. A message. The sender's name made me pause, Amanda. I couldn't remember the last time she'd reached out. Maybe it was the day the police had asked them to leave my apartment. The screen glowed in the golden dusk. I hesitated, then opened it. I'm sorry, for everything. Just 6 words. No explanations. No excuses. Not begging. I stared at the message for a long time. My heart didn't tighten, and the old pain didn't rise. There was only a quiet, passing tenderness like a breeze brushing by. I knew it must have taken her something, pride, courage, or maybe exhaustion to type those 2 words. And I also knew it didn't change anything. But it didn't need to. I smiled faintly, set the phone down, and left the message unread but unerased. Then I opened the small black journal beside my laptop and wrote one simple line in ink. Forgiveness doesn't always need a reply. Because forgiveness isn't reopening the door for someone to return. It's closing it gently, so you no longer have to stare at the wound. I closed the journal and felt a strange, quiet warmth spread through me. As if I had just finished the last page of a chapter I once thought would never end. Outside, night began to settle. The high-rises lit up one by one, their reflections scattering across the lake like thousands of shattered mirrors. I stepped onto the balcony, the wind carrying a faint saltiness from the water, weaving through my hair. Below, the hum of traffic mingled with distant music from a bar down the street. Life went on, not pausing for anyone, not waiting for anyone to return. I leaned against the railing and looked down at the same city that had once witnessed me break apart, and later watched me rebuild myself piece by piece. I thought back to the day I left Boise empty-handed, terrified, clinging to the fragile hope that somewhere out there, life could be kinder. Now, I no longer search for kindness in others. I've learned how to create it within myself. As the last trace of daylight faded, I felt a perfect stillness settle inside me. I didn't need validation. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need anyone to come back. All I needed was to know I had chosen right. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't try to prove anything. I simply walked away, and that, more than anything, is what made me free. I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and let the apartment sink into the soft glow of dusk. My footsteps were gentle against the wooden floor as I returned to the balcony. The evening air was cooler now, but it no longer made me shiver. I looked toward the horizon, where the sun had completely disappeared behind the skyline, and whispered to myself not as a declaration, but as an acceptance. I once thought family was where you had to return. But sometimes, it's simply where you have to leave to finally become yourself. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling it mingle with the lake's briny air. In that moment, I was no longer the girl who stood silent beside a shattered cake, nor the woman burdened by conditional love. I was simply Amelia Wilson, a woman who had finally found enough self-respect to choose herself. And as the first star flickered over the Seattle sky, I smiled quietly, peacefully. There was nothing more to say. Because every story, no matter how painful, can end in peace. If you're brave enough to let go.